Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends, and we're here to talk about empathy and what is empathy. And I'm going to let Jeannie talk about that in a moment. I want to tell you that I have a really wonderful panel. I have Jeannie Locke Alford here, and Krishna decided to join us. We'll see how long he'll stay, but he usually has a lot to say. And Avi Gordon from Virginia, West Virginia, at Yogaville. I believe that's what it's called now. And Jeannie, can you take over so I can get it on Facebook?
Sure.
Thank you.
So we spent last week talking about transformation, which is really looking inwardly at who we are, where we want to be, setting goals, things of that nature. And this time we're going to talk about empathy, and that's looking at other people, listening to other people, understanding other people. Henry David Thoreau wrote about empathy. Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant? And I want you to stop and think about that. Then a University of Cambridge professor, Simon Baron-Cohen, wrote, empathy is a skill like any other human skill. If you get a chance to practice, you can get better at it. So it's something that I think would help us as we grow in the world. And it's something my mother started teaching me very young, when she would say to me, walk in somebody else's shoes. And to me, that's how I was introduced to empathy, literally feeling like I was in another person's place, walking in their shoes. Avi, how does that sound to you?
Yeah, resonates deeply. Thank you for sharing those quotes. And I'm just even sitting with the Thoreau quote right now. Can you repeat it again about looking in someone's eye and that being the most important thing to do? One of the most important things.
Sure. Could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through each other's eyes for an instant?
So I love that so much. Like to really just even beyond see, feel what life might be like for another person. It's almost overwhelming, which is perhaps why we don't practice that skill very often. But I think it's really like if we're wanting to have relationships and even broaden ourselves and expand outside of our own beings, then to do this, to feel another person, to practice that skill, I think it is like a miracle. Really, it's really amazing. I'd like to practice more often.
Yeah, I think it's like breathing and riding a bike. The more you do it, as the professor said, the easier it gets. And one of the things that I find is um, when I'm feeling particularly empathic, and I can walk into a room and I'll feel like if somebody's upset. And I think we all do when we pay attention. We can feel another person. But the negative emotions, when somebody's upset or hurt, those seem to come back through a lot clearer. But again, my mother, the great American philosopher Dorothy Lillian Locke, she would say, walk in somebody else's shoes. And as a child, you're very literal when somebody says that. So I actually pictured myself in walking in somebody else's shoes, trying to see the world from their perspective. And it's eye-opening when you take that moment to see from their eyes, because we don't know what people go through. People don't know what we go through. I may take 4 hours to look this great, where somebody else can get up out of bed and, wash their face and they look good. We have no idea. My I have an older sister who had an autoimmune disease, and literally it took her 3 hours to kind of deal with getting ready for life. And until I understood that, it was hard not to be judgmental when she, would show up late to something. I didn't realize until she told me she had this diagnosis, what was going on. And once that happened, it was easier for me to understand and to relate with her and to speak with her about a number of different things, because I set judgment aside. And I think empathy asks us to set judgment aside, because who are we to judge? We don't know what goes into somebody's life. We don't know the trials that they're facing. We don't know that they're having financial troubles, or that their job is at risk, or that they're having a great time at the job, unless they tell us. And words are only 7% of our conversation, because there's so many nonverbal cues. And that's how you start to feel, is when you open yourself up to the nonverbal. You look like you're ready to jump in.
I just wanted to ask, why do we do this judging thing? Why do we do that?
I would like to know. I've spent a good portion of the last 4 or 5 years working at trying to not be judgmental, because I found like it just happens. And I think that it's a skill, judgment, that we seem to highly value in our society, because I see everybody doing it. So it's something we got taught somewhere along the way. And I don't know about you, Avi, because like you might not have noticed, but I'm like a girl, and I've grown up being taught to look at other people, render a judgment on how they're dressed so that I could dress better, render a judgment on their style so I could be better, render a judgment on how they put makeup on, because we're always told you can look better than you do, which is ridiculous. My older brother, who I lost when I was 17 through an automobile accident. So things that I remember from him are like things that you remember from the Greek god, because in my memory, he could do no wrong, even though he was like your regular older brother and, razzed you and teased you and did all the things that big brothers do. But I remember him telling me once, you don't need all that stuff on your face. You look beautiful without it. And that was wonderful. I hold on to it. But after, let's admit to 30 years, okay, after many, many years of listening to ads on TV, I've been told that I could do better. I could contour my face. I could put on different makeup. I can use a different color of lipstick. You could get your colors done so that the colors you wear complement who you are. There's so many messages we're given that judgment becomes a fallout of it. And it's mostly judging ourselves. I do believe that when we start making judgments, we're judging from our own perspective, but we're judging ourselves because we project our misgivings and our fears on other people, and we end up judging them. That's the best explanation I could come to as to why we judge. And that's where empathy kind of helped me get away from that, because I don't want anybody judging me, and so I have to stop judging others. And to stop judging others, I need to see the world through their eyes and listen to them, I should say, which is another skill that we need to continually work on.
Yeah, listening is an issue that many people need to work on. And it's one of the reasons we are not empathetic, because we don't necessarily listen to what the person is saying. And we don't necessarily understand words the same way as the person who's speaking. And that causes a great deal of confusion, a great deal of misunderstanding. And those misunderstandings can lead to conflict, such as war. You could actually be saying the same thing, just with a different twist of words, and no one understands each other.
That's very true. In fact, I think it was Siemens did a study, I think it was around 10 years ago, where they looked at communication styles of their workforce, and they found that there's like 17 hours of work, 17 hours per week spent undoing miscommunication. That's half your work week if you're working a 40-hour work week. So if half your work week is spent, I was going to say wasted, but spent on undoing what you didn't hear in the first place, that illustrates the need to really work at listening. And if we're not listening, we're only seeing what we want to see, then we're only seeing, like 1/10 of what we should be. Avi?
Yeah, what's coming to me is that not only not listening, but not being able to admit when I wasn't listening and ask for someone to repeat it. Because what does that say about me? Going back to what you were speaking to in terms of the self-judgment and wanting to appear good in so many ways. So to say like, oh, wait a second, I just had like, my mind just went wherever. I didn't hear what you just said. Like, can you please repeat it for me? I find that to be such an uncommon request to make. And if we can allow each other more leeway, like, okay, we're all trying to learn how to listen and also admit when I wasn't listening so that I can hear what you're trying to say and we can communicate well, as opposed to pretending like I heard everything that you just said when I didn't. And then later on, that's going to cause, things to collapse.
Yeah, I'm laughing a little bit because with today's cell phone technology, which has come a long way, I'm not going to denigrate anything in the cell phone world, but clearly every once in a while a call drops or you get a break in the transmission. So sometimes I go, excuse me, my cell phone messed up. I didn't hear you, but clearly there was never a problem. So, that's just one way. The other way I bring up is, I'm way over 40. So could you repeat that again? Because I just need to make sure I heard it right. That and the funniest one is when I steal a line from the movie Up with the dog. You just go squirrel, which is shiny object, because that happens. Our attention span is seconds long. It used to be that adults could sit for up to 2 hours before their attention span would go crazy, or at least that's what they used to tell us. And now I think it's less than 2 minutes. So listening is an important skill that goes along, I think, with empathy, understanding what was said before you respond. And the other thing about listening I want to bring up is that for the most part, many people, including myself, will start hearing something, and about halfway through, you jump into the Rolodex inside of your head and start thinking, what is it that I have that I can respond? How can I show up and let them know that I'm smart? How can I impress this person? And you're so tied up in what you're going to say that you don't hear the rest of it. And that takes really focusing and allowing somebody to finish what they're saying before you respond. And that's another skill that would be good to work on.
Well, Avi does something, and here I am doing that now. But Avi has a thing in Clubhouse where he says, let's all take a deep breath before going to the next speaker or before even responding. And although I'm not really good at it all the time, Avi, and I admit to it, but it's a wonderful way of just stopping. Our brains are just moving so quickly these days that we don't think about what we're doing or how we're saying it, or even how we use our words. You know, if someone grew up in an apartment and you say house, you think of a completely different place than a farmhouse with land around it and a single home. So when they hear that word, they think differently than what the person speaking about may be speaking. So we don't always hear it. And there are times that I've been in a conversation and we're basically saying the same thing, but how we use our words makes it look like, oh, we're talking two different languages. And we're not. We're actually saying the same thing. And we keep on saying it, and the other person doesn't hear it or doesn't hear it in the way we want them to hear it.
That's when you violently agree. You can say, you know, we violently agree here. Let's stop and talk. We violently agree. We're saying the same thing.
But even if we are agreeing, we don't even realize that we're agreeing. Avi?
Yeah. What's coming to me now is just like, what's the point of it? You know, like what are we doing? Like, what are we trying to accomplish in these conversations? You know, um, do I want? It's like I'm trying to prove my point even after I've proven my point. Is what you're saying? Like the other person agrees with me, but yet I'm still talking. So it's like this habit of what I say is like taking our opinions so seriously, like almost an epidemic of human beings doing this. Um, and I'm very interested in just beginning to practice the skill. I mean, just this word practice and the other word skill that you brought up, Jeannie, like I love it so much because it's a clear way of beginning to shift my habits, my tendencies, you know? Um, so back to like what is the point of it? Like what is the point of having the conversation? To me, if I don't stop, I'm not receiving the juice. It's like it's in those pauses where I'm integrating and I'm receiving like the energy that someone else has given me. But just go, 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 one person on top of the next, speaking, you know, and then more input, 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 input. I never tasted like the food, right? It's like just eating all day long. I never stopped to taste it.
Yeah, I think there's a tendency, and it may be because we have so much information coming at us every day. You know, that, and so many people think that their voices need to be heard because why not? We all want to be heard, but we're not. And that might be why it feels like, you know, we're actually shouting at each other so that we could be heard or noticed or appreciated. And, you know, I kind of remember way back in the old days of the last century, we would go visit my grandparents, and my lovely grandparents, they were these two looming large personalities in my life. And then as I grew up, I found out my grandmother was 4'6" and my grandfather barely hit 5 feet. So they were tiny people, but they were huge. And they had 39 grandchildren. They had 8 children. So it was a big, when we got together, it was a big get together. My grandmother would stop, hold you by your arms, look you in the eye, and she would say something very simple like, you know, I love you. and you felt validated and seen, maybe not heard, because it was the era of children should be seen and not heard, but she allowed us to kind of run crazy around the house because, that's what kids do. But she would stop us, make sure that we heard her say that. And that's a feeling that I think we all try to recreate, is to that feeling of being heard and being seen. And if somebody's not getting what we say, our voice gets a little louder. And then we have those stereotypical shouting matches when we're violently agreeing about something, but you can't stop until you make your point. And, the people around you are like, these guys, they don't even realize how rude they are because they're taking over my space. But we're competing. We're competing to be seen. We're competing to be heard. We're competing to be validated. And it goes back to last week when we were talking about transformation, is understanding where we want to go, why we want to be seen and validated, and have somebody else be empathic and know where we're coming from. But that happens when we do it for ourselves. When we start to feel what life is like in somebody else's shoes, then we can calm down a little bit and understand that there is a lot of noise. I've been doing PR and communications for decades. And the first thing we say when we're talking to a new potential client is, let's put together a strategy to get above the noise. Now, I often think if everybody's getting above the noise, you're getting above it and you're getting above it, the noise level just keeps getting higher and higher. And it's when you take that deep breath, like you do, like you say on your Clubhouse program, Avi, you take that deep breath, you can go, okay, and your brain can then register, I've been heard. And that's a skill as well, knowing and receiving that you've been heard, instead of kind of being a toddler. When a toddler's throwing a temper tantrum, it's because they're not heard, and they're not heard because they don't have the ability to speak at this point. So it's frustrating. It's a communications issue. But that level of noise when they're throwing a temper tantrum can be enormous. But once they're heard, you see them start to let loose and let go. So maybe we're in a world filled with toddlers. What do you think?
That's kind of scary. I don't know if I want to be in, but actually, if you think about it, we really are. We're all growing. We all have a different destination. So, we think, oh, because I'm 20, I can do this, or I'm 8, I can do this. Maybe we're all kind of conglomerated in and can't do anything. I don't know. I wonder if we're all AI people and we just don't know it. We're just finding it out now, many centuries away.
I think Elon Musk has been working on that theory. He said that we were all in like a video game world once, and I just kind of sat back and was like, well, there's a thought. But if you think about it, Carla, how many billions of years has the Earth been around? I mean, at least, we can say that we're aware of 25,000 years of development. And in the time we've been here, it's been short. It's been kind of a nanosecond on the space-time continuum. So maybe we are toddlers trying to figure it out. But there has to be a group of parents, and parents are pretty good at being empathic and having empathy for their children, because they kind of think through what's going on with their kids to try to deal with whatever the crisis of the day is, right? Go ahead, Avi. I see it coming.
You're good at seeing. um, the word is maturity to me. What does it mean to be mature, right? To move from being a toddler to being, if we want to call it, an adult, right? So back to being seen, being heard. Um, what if, what if I don't need to? What if I have no, what if I feel whole and complete and don't need anyone else to see me or hear me anymore? Just throwing it out as a possibility. Maybe it will always be the case for all of us that we all want to be validated endlessly. We all want the attention and other people to see us. But maybe it being mature is coming to a place where that that doesn't really matter so much to me anymore. I've fostered enough of a relationship with myself that I feel whole, that I have a right to be myself, and therefore I don't still have this thirst for other people to hear me. What if?
That's a good what if, and that's, I think, one of the things that we aspire to. Um, as soon as you asked the question, the word confidence pulled into my head. And when you don't need others to validate you, you can walk in your own shoes on your own path confidently because you know you have something to share and you can move forward step by step, which is, I think, something that where it's you become self-validating. Um, and when you're confident in your own skills and in your own person, then you have plenty of time, space, and energy to step into somebody else's shoes and understand where they're coming from, and listen to their issues and hopefully give them some advice when they're ready for it so that they can move forward and become confident. I raised a pretty dynamic child who at one point was given some pretty negative labels in school, like defiant and potential juvenile delinquent. But I chose as a parent not to react in the way that I would say was expected, because what I saw was spirit, a very strong spirit in this child, and I was going to protect that spirit. So it was a little bit more difficult in his teenage years to raise him, and he and I talk about this regularly. He's a extremely well situated young man. He's very confident in himself now, but in the adolescent years, he was kind of hard to deal with. And there are ways that I could have tamed his spirit or broken his spirit the way that they used to do when we were kids. And I chose not to. And there was an implied confidence that I didn't totally feel when I was raising him. But I did say to my parents, no, I'm not going to raise the belt to him. I'm not going to do that. We're going to figure this out. And, we had some pretty big to-dos and issues with him, but it took me holding on to my own conviction very hard, with people judging me and telling me what to do. It was very hard for me to say, no, stop, I'm breaking this cycle. And I'm pleased that my son is doing so well now. And like I said, we talk about it because he's raising kids now, and I want him to use a different perspective on how to raise kids so that the cycle that I broke continues to grow in a real positive way. But I bring it up because the level of judgment that I felt was huge. And it was from my family, from my friends, people telling me how to do it. And it took great inner strength for me to say, stop. no, we're not doing it that way. But I questioned myself every step of the way during those years, thinking I was screwing up because that's what was being reflected to me. But I was using my level of empathy, understanding this kid trying to struggle to be who he is. And when it all comes down to it, if we understood that the only reason we're here on this earth is to know love, then we might give up on the judgment just a little bit and start to understand other people just a little bit, and maybe look at this crazy divisive world that we feel like we're living in as that virtual world that you mentioned, that it looks like things are going crazy. If I just listen to the news, I'm going to know all this negative stuff. I'm going to know that apparently the president's screwing up. Apparently out here in California, we're wasting time with the recall. All this stuff that is given. And in truth, when I walk out that door every day, my job is to share love with the world and to only worry about the people in my sphere, because that's the only way that I can add my level of control. And that's what I think a lot of people are looking for, is to have a level of control. The only thing I have control over is how I act or react in the world. And how that affects other people is up to other people. But if I want to make sure I have a positive reaction, I need to be positive. I need to be supportive. I need to show empathy to show that I understand somebody, but not in that superficial, oh, I can tell you're upset kind of thing, but more along with, I hear you. I'm here for you if you need me. Just let me know. And then people will respond. But we are in a chaotic time. And if we can each of us brings a little bit of peace in somebody else's world, that's how we affect the world and bring love. And that's kind of how I looked at raising my kid. I needed to figure out what was making him so chaotic. And then every day, without fail, he heard, I love you. No matter what, I love you. And I love that today, when I go to see him or when I talk to him on the phone, he says that to me, which is a testament to the bond that we grew. And I think we can grow that bond with just about everybody in our inner circle if we can understand from their perspective. What do you think, Carla?
I agree. I think we forget, and I say this a lot, we forget how connected we are. And it doesn't matter if someone agrees with us or not, we're still connected to each other just by the essence of our life, which is our breath. And that often gets very confused because we think, oh, it needs to be this way or it needs to be that way. And no, it doesn't. It just needs to be. I feel we all need to learn to accept each other. Even the bank robber, we need to accept, because is he doing it to be mean, or is he doing it to help his family live, to, out of love for a girlfriend or his wife or whatever? And if we could only be more accepting of who people are, then maybe all these wars and all this negativity would just vanish, because we would just accept each other. And Jeannie, this is a little off topic, but I want you to check. Is MindPlore on the MindPlore page at all?
Let me check.
Meanwhile, Avi, let's get back to what I was saying. What do you think? Do you think we can all come together? Or is that something that cannot happen in the world?
Well, I know I'll never see it completely in my lifetime, but it's enough.
Whoa, I have a question. Why do you say you won't see it completely in our lifetime?
I see things more on a spectrum, and that's okay for me to move in the direction of us all being connected, and maybe endlessly, and that's okay. You know, to your point, I think essential in us making steps in that direction is understanding our relationship with evil, essentially an enemy and evil, which I think all of us mostly grew up with this concept. And it's like, okay, yeah, there's evil in the world. There's bad people in the world. And I find that that thought pretty detrimental to all of us. And being a teacher really gave me proof that this is not the case. You know, when I was a kindergarten teacher, every one of those children are beautiful and deserve love. No human being is born evil. This is my belief as much as I believe anything. And so then I need another word for the bank robber, for the person that's committing horrific acts. What's the word if they're not evil? I use the word confused. Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion happening, but also confusion again inside ourselves in terms of me feeling that I need to compete against others. I mean, exactly even back to what Jeannie was talking about in terms of putting on makeup and appearing and judging someone else, like, you know, how can they look better? How can I look better than them? This is very much at the root of I think the question that you're asking. How can we feel more connected? That you are both me, that I'm connected to everything. I mean, I'm not asking anyone to believe it because I'm saying it. You know, all I ask is to explore, test it out, see how it feels. Do you feel that you're totally alone in isolation, or do you feel that you're connected to something larger than yourself? Just ask the question.
It's a very good question. And it takes us pretty deep to try to answer. Like, I've worked really hard. I found something really interesting and somewhat childlike. Evil is live backwards. And so I try to not focus on what I think might be evil, even though, like I said, if you listen to the news, that's pretty much all you hear. You know, I try to remember personally that there's a spark of Christ, God, or the universe, whatever your religion talks about. There's a spark of something greater that's in each of us. That's spirit, basically. And we have this great thing called free will. And it's the free will where we get to make decisions on how we show up in the world. And, you know, somebody who's broken for some reason shows up and does something totally evil. It's totally wrong. You know, we could go into a whole conversation on what is missing or whatever, but there are decisions that were made throughout this person's life that led them to this place. Just as there's decisions that we make. You know, this woman just totally judged me and made a statement and embarrassed me. Do I come back with, you know, a really sarcastic remark and hurt her feelings? Or do I say, that's your opinion, not mine? You know, it's how we show up that matters. It doesn't matter what somebody else does. And I have been in many a situation where I've wanted to say something really pithy that I knew would hurt somebody's feelings. But two things happen. One is I have a strong need not to do that. But the other is most of the time those pithy remarks come about 5 minutes too late. I might be quick-witted, but sometimes it's just like, why didn't I think of that before? But that it's more important to me that we take time to understand that we all start, as you said, we're all born innocent and good. There's a lot of things that go into what makes us who we are as adults. And that's where empathy really comes in, trying to understand the person who struggled just to show up, who grew up without new shoes every school year because their family couldn't afford it, is going to look at buying a pair of shoes a lot differently than the person who was able to buy shoes every 3 or 4 months as they were growing up. I remember my dad telling me about putting newspapers in his shoes during the Depression because, he'd wear them out so fast when he was a child during the Depression. He'd wear them out so fast and they didn't have the money to go replace them. So they put newspapers in them. Oh, okay. That sounds horrible by today's standards, but in the 1930s, that's what you did. So understanding some of the stories that make up who the people are, help us to understand who they are as they show up in the world. But I also know that personally, we need to understand the stories that we grew up with and decide as an adult, was that our story or was that somebody else's story? We're in the middle of a pandemic. And I think about my 6th year of being alive. I was in 1st grade and I caught German measles. And then my mother had 7 kids just fall, one after the other. So she had 7 weeks of German measles. And then we had a little quiet time. And then apparently I caught chickenpox. And my mother starts through the whole thing with 7 groups of, chickenpox. And then I caught a 3rd one, and I don't recall what it was, but it was like, that was the year of everybody being sick. And I remember my mother always having a frown on her face and, responding angrily, it felt like, to a 6-year-old. But now as an adult, when I think about the stories that she told, the stories really were that each of us got sick and it was really hard on her, even though she would say, literally she would go, you brought all this stuff in the house. Well, what's a 6-year-old going to do? I'm going to play with friends. And if somebody's sick and, and I'm exposed, and it was before we had all the vaccines, so you have to look at the stories that make up who you are and unpack them to see if that was your story or somebody else told that story. And when you can unpack them, then you can become more empathic and empathetic to others because they don't know the stories that they were told, how true they are. My older sister would tell me I always got in trouble. Well, for her, she's 4 years older than me. From her perspective, yeah, I always got into trouble, but I was a 2-year-old. That's what 2-year-olds do. But all my life, throughout teenagehood, when we lived together, she called me the troublemaker. And it wasn't until in my 20s when I started that process that you do in your 20s of trying to grow up and be mature. I was like, what? Why do I feel like I'm a troublemaker? Oh, somebody told you were. Was I really? No, from her perspective, I was. And you can undo those things by understanding where that story really comes from. But we don't take time to do that for ourselves, let alone other people. And that's why the professor said that empathy is a skill that needs to be practiced. You know, we have to stop and think about things and not just react. And reacting is a spur of the moment, shoot from the hip, emotional kind of thing, where responding is take a moment, think it through, and respond logically. So you get to choose, am I going to be reacting or responding? And that changes how we show up in the world.
That's kind of interesting. This morning, I was listening to an Abraham Hicks thingy on manifestation and thinking, and her whole thing was, before you make a decision, are you making a decision because someone wants you to make it? Or are you making it because it's in alignment with how you are thinking and in alignment with your own life? And I think many times we make decisions of doing an action because someone has told us this is what we do. Don't laugh loud, because if you laugh loud, people think it's weird. Or don't drink water on a broadcast because it really doesn't look good for you. But you need to make decisions based on what is right for you and not what is right for someone else. And in being empathic, it appears, and you guys can argue with me, we need to be consistent in doing what we need to do for ourselves, but also accept that everyone else is different. Everyone else has a different path, and we need to accept that path of another person in order to live coherently with those who are, on the planet right now. You guys can react now.
Well, I'm smiling because that brings up this word that Avi used that I want to make sure we didn't pass over too quickly, and that's maturity. Understanding that we have different paths and we go different ways, we have to understand that we ourselves are not in control of somebody else. As a manager in a large corporation, I had to go through a process of letting go, if you will. When I had people directly reporting to me, I would say, I want you to do X, Y, and Z. And I could sit down like a teacher would and say, here's what you do, step 1, step 2, step 3. But we're all adults, and who has time to do that? I had to let them do the task the way they knew how to do the task, and not say, stop, that's not what I wanted. I had to let them deliver what I asked for. And it was so difficult when I first started. I don't know if you guys have gone through this before, but my inclination was to guide them and to control all the decisions that they made so that it would come out the way I envisioned it. And yet I had to learn pretty much in an instant, and I had to learn to let go of that level of control, because these people were adults. They had enough information and they were experts in what they were doing. So they would say, well, here's how I want to do it. And then I had to tell them, go ahead. And it was really hard at first for me to do that. But by the end of working with this group of people, we were a good team. I got to a point where I was saying, we have a crisis over here. I need you to take over this part. I need you to take over this part. And they would just go. And literally one time we did have I'm in PR, so it was a crisis of communication. Nobody was dying or anything. But I called up one of my direct reports and I said, here's the situation. Here's what I need you to do. And then the next step will be this. And I got on an airplane because I was going across country. By the time I landed 5 hours later, she did what she needed to do, turned it over to the second person, they did what they needed to do. And by the time I landed, the project had been completed and the crisis had been averted. And that was me totally letting go because I was on an airplane and couldn't do anything. And that's when I realized that my team had matured. And I had matured in how I managed, because then I started telling them I'm more your coach than your manager. You know, we're going to figure out, I used a baseball analogy, and it's like, we're going to figure out what your position is. You're going to go do it. So if you're a third baseman, you know what to do. And if you're the first baseman, you know what to do. But that was an eye-opening moment for me on how to allow others to mature. Avi, over to you.
Well, I want to emphasize something else you've brought up a few times now, and that is control. And it kind of just like hit me how valuable accepting where I have control and where I don't is. Like if I really focus on the things that I can control, that's so rewarding. Like it's totally liberating. And trying to control things that I don't, other people, is going to frustrate me needlessly and cause me so much pain. So like I've known that, I've seen that, but just in you speaking, it kind of just like hit me how refreshing it is, how liberating it is to really take that on. Just say, oh, I'm just going to focus on that which what I can control. And yeah, just wanted to say that.
And yet we all want to be in control, and no one is in control when it comes down to it.
Well, and you're right. And there's another word that goes with that, and it's power. When we try to exert our control over everyone, we're actually trying to exert a power. You know, I have power over you, so I'm going to tell you what to do. And that's not the case. You know, I have power over nobody else but me. But if you do what do they do in the morgue? An autopsy. If you do an autopsy on most disagreements in the world, you can come down to it's a power grab or a power struggle. My son and I used him as an example earlier, and I know if he were to hear all these, he'd be mad at me because I tell stories about him all the time. But he's what I know. And when he was 2, throwing temper tantrums, I knew that there was a power struggle, but he couldn't explain to me what he needed. So there was some emotions and chaos around it. And when I figured out it was a communication issue, then we were able to kind of work it through. And I really worked with him on his communication skills. When he was 13, 14, 15, it was a different power struggle, but it was still a power struggle. And I remember saying, oh, it's like when he was 2 throwing temper tantrums. Yeah, and I started treating it a little differently. And I would say, let's sit down and figure out what's really going on. And then we would find out what the issues were, and we could deal with them. But it was really difficult for me to get to a point where it's like my kid wants to struggle over power with me. And that's when he heard that your job is to push boundaries. My job is to set boundaries. And that's why there's always going to be a friction. And that cleared up a lot of cacophony, I would call it. But when a lot of times when you see adults arguing or having problems, it comes down to who's in charge, who has power. Even onto the national scene, we've got several issues that wouldn't be appropriate to bring up, but they come down to who's got the power, who has the power to make a choice over you, who has the power to set up the environment you're in. Well, that's where politics starts to come in, and you see the push me, pull you, the red and the blue. And when you start to look at it like this is just a power struggle, like when we were kids, then you go, oh, because mature people don't need to struggle over power. Mature people figure out their roles together and figure out how to move things along.
Mature people are grateful.
There you go. Mature people are grateful. I'm grateful every time I can show up in the world. It's something as simple as I'm grateful that I have coffee that helps me, be somewhat human in the early morning hours. There's lots to be grateful for, and yet we still struggle for power. And when I stopped struggling for power, I started to feel like I could show up and be much more of the beacon of hope that I want to be. I wish I had the strength and the confidence to go up to people and go, you realize this is only a power struggle and you guys are going to be okay. But that's not my place. But that's where empathy comes in. That's where you can walk into a room and say, "Ooh, I can tell you've had a hard day. You want to tell me about it?" And understand that somebody's coming into the world, into your world from a different place. And there he goes. He's ready to say it again.
Yeah. So another word thought of connecting with empathy, and that is trust. Trusting in the effects of me practicing being empathetic, right? So we could be in a room, right, and there's these things going on, right? Disagreements, arguments, and someone's going through some suffering, and I'm going to feel empathy for them. It might seem like on the surface that's not going to do anything, but can I just trust in the effect of me being empathetic? That's big for me.
It is big, and it changes somebody else's world on a cellular level that we may not see. Hearing, seeing. I love the scene in Avatar where they say, "I see you, I hear you." That means a lot to people. And if we did that a few times every day, we'd have a different world that we live in, because things change in your circle, in your inner circle, and then in theirs, and then theirs, and it goes so on and so on. I see you, I hear you.
And even more than just saying the words, actually to be doing those things.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing, and there's no need to struggle for that power. That's something we can do freely. Carla, it looks like you're getting ready to say something.
I am. Believe it or not, we have been talking for a little over an hour.
Wow.
Believe it or not. And I hate to end it, but it is time to end the conversation today on empathy. And I think one thing we agree is it's important for us to learn to be more empathetic throughout the world, and recognize that differences don't mean that we are in conflict. They just mean it exists. And with that, I hope someone has seen this. We are MindPlore with Carla, and hopefully by Thursday, we will be back to normal broadcasting. I want to thank Jeannie and Avi for being here today, because we had no idea what may happen, but we wanted to talk and keep the show going. And if you have been able to watch, thank you so very much. We were only able to put this on literally on YouTube. It is not live on Facebook. And with that, let's wave goodbye.
Let's ask people to put comments in if they see it so that we know.
Oh, good idea. I don't know if I know that on YouTube they cannot comment, but they may be able to comment on Facebook. That's a whole other chapter going on. And with that, can we wave goodbye? Bye.